Welcome to the Supplier Diversity and Inclusion Podcast by Fips Consulting. In this podcast, I speak with international guests who share their insights and experiences on supplier diversity and inclusion. Today, I'm joined by Lisa Thorne, CEO and founder of Together Global. Lisa, it's so good you join me.
Lovely to join your podcast, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Lisa and I met a couple of years ago at the TSA event in London, and we have since been connected and collaborating on DEI projects. So, Lisa, maybe you can share what are you doing at Together Global?
Well, at Together Global, what we do is we address the impact of friction on cross-border team performance. So when I say friction, what I mean is in the modern globalized workforce, everyone's working across borders. Teams, whether large or small, especially in large multinational organizations, of course, they're working across borders. And people tend to accept friction or the tension that arises when working cross-culturally as inevitable. It's not addressed because people are a bit worried about it. They kind of, and it's not addressed, so therefore no one wants to address it. And it's seen as something of a hot potato because it could be seen as rude or racist or personal. This is the conclusion I've come to. And so people don't address it. Now, recent research from last year shows that the impact of friction on workplace performance is between 20 to 40% loss of productivity, which is staggering. And when you look at it, of course, this is what I specialize in, and I see it all the time. And it's our slogan is it's not you, it's not me, it's culture. Because what happens is we're all programmed to see the world through our lens, our cultural lens. So if I'm British, which I am, I like to give feedback in a kind of a subtle way, and I don't like to rock the boat. And politeness is very important. I always say my pleases and thank yous. So if I'm interacting with a team in, for instance, Czechoslovakia, and they're very blunt, they're saying exactly what they think, for me, it can seem a bit rude. Now, I'm not going to say that, but I'm going to feel it. And so they, conversely, will look at the way I'm communicating and think that's odd in some way. And this is the issue with culture, is that each of us is brought up in a cultural ecosystem. And so we think of the way we act and the way we respond and we communicate as being normal, as making sense, as being logical, and therefore good. And conversely, we think of the way that others communicate as being strange and unpredictable and doesn't make any sense and therefore bad. And so the impact of this when you have cross-border teams is massive, and we specialize in addressing it because we know the friction is not inevitable, it's measurable, it's diagnosable, and it's fixable.
I love it. It's such an interesting topic, and I think many companies probably have not thought about that cultural differences when they, for example, outsource a department or some projects, and then you suddenly work internationally with maybe people from India or China or other countries in Europe, or even within the same country where you already have different cultural behaviors. Now, why did you start your business?
Right. So I started it back in 2012, really. I'd been working in a UK-based global bank in Canary Wharf, and I had been working diversity and inclusion. And after I was working there, I went to continue my work in D&I. And the thing that made my approach to D&I unique, I like to think, is that I'd always worked in the entrepreneurial world. And so in the entrepreneurial world, you leverage your lack of knowledge, because rather than going in there and being someone who's used to the corporate world and then practicing that, I went into this huge bank from an entrepreneurial world and I applied this entrepreneurial approach. So what I did was, with not knowing anything about diversity and inclusion and best practice, I looked purely from the perspective of problem and solution. So the work I did for the bank was fantastic. We won all the awards, including the European Diversity and Inclusion Awards. My approach was described as game changing, not just for this particular bank, but the industry. That was why I then I found the thing I loved doing, that I was really great at doing, and that was applying an entrepreneurial approach in a corporate setting and with a diversity and inclusion angle. So after I left the bank, because it was only a consultancy role, I then tried to continue selling diversity and inclusion programs, but I found that all that happened really was that that I would speak to stakeholders who would then go and say, "Oh, we're doing it internally." So basically, take the ideas and do them themselves. So that wasn't much of a business for me. So I then realised that from my perspective, my experience was that in diversity and inclusion, if it's a large organisation, then they were doing it themselves. If it was a smaller organisation, they didn't really have any budget for it. So I couldn't see a business. I didn't have an opportunity to run a business. I came up with some daft ideas for names like Daring D&I and so on, but I realised that I didn't have a business. So what I did was, as an entrepreneur, I thought, right, I need to go and find a problem to solve which will deliver measurable business value, which will basically either make clients money or save clients money. So I looked and I thought, well, what about the impact of cultural differences? Because I could see from within the organisation that cultural differences are addressed through traditional cultural training, cross-cultural training, cultural sensitization, it was called as well. So, and which companies still do. And it's great, but it's different from what I do. Because with this cross-cultural training, it tends to be quite academic in its approach, Hofstede and power distance and different dimensions, and it looks at cultural intelligence and so on. And it's teaching, the focus tends to be teaching one side about the other. And that's really useful, but it can actually increase this sense of them and us. What I do that's different is I've created a program that identifies and surfaces friction, removes it, creates a hybrid culture, and then gets the team, when they're culturally aligned, delivering specific business outcomes. So the whole foundation of what I've created here is not cross-cultural training. It's not soft skills. What it is it's evidence-based, and it's a program, Teams in Flow, that is really showing, proving and demonstrating that cultural alignment is infrastructure. So it's important to get your teams, your cross-border teams, culturally aligned, because it'll impact the way they operate, the results they get. So, in summary, the result of the last 10 years of work that I've spent in this area is identifying that friction is largely ignored at the senior level, or senior leaders don't know about it. Delivery teams won't talk about it. HR don't want to know about it. So it's an issue that's endemic across organisations, large and small, sector agnostic. And so it's a massive opportunity for me. And my challenge has been to be given the opportunity to demonstrate the measurable before and after results that you can achieve when you get teams culturally aligned. So we're currently running a pilot with a university where we're literally doing a real life experiment, where we're taking teams, we're getting them culturally aligned, we're comparing performance with teams which are control teams that are not culturally aligned, and we're demonstrating the impact on business goals, business results, process efficiency, and anonymous people metrics, and the feedback people give when the feedback is anonymous versus when it comes via employer survey is completely different. And so that's what we're doing, and we're proving that being culturally aligned should be part of organisations' infrastructure, not just an HR initiative or a nice to have or fluffy soft skills training course. That actually it's fundamental to if you want to get your team performing better and you want to get them performing as one, the foundational step is to get the team culturally aligned.
Such an interesting and important topic. And I think it's so often forgotten when companies have diversity and inclusion programs, especially within HR, where they bring in different people, which is great, right? There are studies that this is also creating more innovation, higher revenue, and so on. Having also a look at once they are working together and with all these different cultural backgrounds that they actually also need to align on how they work together. And it's amazing the 20 to 40% loss in productivity with not thinking about the cultural issues that might come up when you work cross border with teams.
Absolutely. And that's why we focus everything on the metrics, because diversity and inclusion, we know, is so important. But proving the impact of having a diverse team can be challenging. For instance, an organization, and all organizations these days will have women's networks, but they're not able to then measure the impact of if they didn't have a women's network, or if they didn't have this initiative or that initiative. They do it or they don't. And nowadays, all organizations jump on the bandwagon, so you don't have that contrast. And so what we do is when we run the Teams in Flow program, we'll take a test team and we'll take a control team. And with the control team, we don't get them culturally aligned. We just measure their business performance, their process, people metrics at the beginning as baseline data, in the middle and the end. And we expect that those metrics to be static or even get worse. And then so that when we have got the other team, the test team, culturally aligned, we can literally measure the impact on performance. So it's all about the measurable before and after results with us.
Brilliant. So you really have an understanding of what does it do if you really have that business resource group or that employee resource group for the different underrepresented groups, or if you don't.
Exactly.
Now, we're in a time where diversity, equality, inclusion is challenged.
Yes, absolutely.
So did the executive order from the US on DEI have any impact on your business?
Well, it doesn't, because my business isn't a diversity and inclusion initiative. I am a diverse supplier. So I'm able to take advantage of organisations wanting to hire more diverse suppliers because I'm a woman. But in terms of the program that I deliver, it's a performance improvement program. So actually, I don't work in DEI, so it hasn't impacted me.
Well, even though there is no, it didn't really have impact on your business. I mean, what do you think about the whole movement right now of going into the other direction on diversity and inclusion?
Well, because I'm a diverse supplier, I network with and socialize with other diverse suppliers, and so I'm very much in the social and professional world of EDI. And so 2 points really. Now, one is I think I kind of predicted this many years ago. When I was working at the global bank, I was invited to do an initiative that was a policy-making initiative in diversity and inclusion. And so I went through to my internal stakeholder and said, what's the challenge? And my stakeholder said, well, it's about people, about attendance. People don't tend to want to come to these events. All we have is we have the same old faces, same old people, but we want to actually get in front of and engage senior stakeholders and people who wouldn't normally take part in this, and we don't know how to do this. So one of my previous jobs was in event organising, and of course, everyone wants to get into the club with a huge queue outside. They don't want to go to the club where there doesn't seem to be anyone there. So my solution was to not allow people to go, make it invite only, and send invites to the most unlike people who are most unlikely to want to go to a D&I event, with an invite that said, dear insert name here, we're holding this event and we'd really love to find out what you think about this. We'd like you to help drive this initiative. And everyone turned up. It was fantastic. They'd never seen such attendance. And I made a video, a placeholder video for this, where I talked about the history of DEI. And it was that it initially came from from social change, and you can take it back to the suffragettes and the movements in the 60s and 70s about equality. And then it turned into a legal imperative. When I was doing it, there was the whole thing of the Equalities Act, and then a business advantage, actually, we're not doing this just because we should, because it's the right thing, but there's what a good idea. So, for instance, if there's a company that's making women's face cream, why not actually we're run by a load of men? None of us actually use the product. This kind of thing. So, the business logic and advantage behind diversity and inclusion. And in this placeholder, I got some chap to record his voice saying, I'm a white male, middle class, middle age, middle manager. Where's my support group? And so when we see all of the changes that have happened, the attack on DEI from the Trump administration, might as well say it as it is, of course, I kind of seen that you can see there's this kind of backlash. So what I could see was that you have the dominant group. And in the corporate world, most corporate worlds, when you look at them, you see them and they don't really reflect society because the leaders are usually all white, middle-aged, heterosexual males. And then you have the women in a kind of supporting role, working as in HR and as secretaries. And that's your traditional corporate structure. So when you had this diversity and inclusion, when I went in there, it seemed to be about moving, disrupting this so that the corporate structure is a more accurate representation of the company and the culture in which the organisation is operating, so that there could even be not a 50% representation of women at a senior level, but certainly larger than, the minuscule percentages that were there at the time. So this whole move about having organisations represent the diversity of the societies in which they operate, for me, seemed the rationale behind diversity and inclusion. Not only is it fairer, it's also more effective. So the dominant group, there's going to be a backlash. And the way I saw it was that there was this kind of feeling of like, hang on a minute, this is a commercial contract. I come and work in this company, I get paid, that's it. Don't start to tell me how I should think. Don't start to make me feel bad about myself. And also, there's the feeling of like, maybe I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to get my promotion because that there's going to be a DEI hire because there's a quota to fill of people from ethnic minority or women. And so this whole backlash that's come from Trump, you can see it's fueled by this feeling of a fear of losing that position of supremacy, of being overtaken. So there's this myth of DEI hire. Recently, I saw a clip on YouTube where it was Fox News and it was the Laura Ingraham show, of course, a well-known right-wing podcaster, an AGA supporter. And she was interviewing someone and they were talking about the halftime show, which is a massive cultural event in America, of course, and the fact that Bad Bunny was going to be headlining. And Laura Ingraham's guest said that it was terrible that Jay-Z was going to be organising the music because he was clearly a DEI hire. Even Laura Ingraham's face just collapsed because she was just kind of going, oh my God. I mean, the idea that Jay-Z is a DEI hire. So there's this real backlash whereby from the old guard, whereby any challenge to the existing or old order by DEI is terrible. And it's a fascinating cultural moment to be living through, because you know what? Bad Bunny in that halftime show, he made woke really cool. And there's a backlash now to the backlash. So it's interesting times to be living through. There's massive high rates of women who are MAGA wives leaving their husbands because they don't really want to be submissive. And so there's going to be a backlash against this backlash, and bring it on. I'm welcoming it. I think that in terms of DEI, I think you've got to be able to have an honest conversation. I think there has been an approach which is very, very dictatorial and laying down the law and loads of jargon and terminology, which I can understand. It gets people's backs up. But the terrible backlash that's happened, we've seen all of the shocking things that have happened in America, and the racism, and particularly the racism in America. It's just awful. And so now I think the next stage will have this counter backlash. And that's where really we have to take a fresh approach towards DEI. And we've got to reassess what it is, why it's important, how it's going to work, and how it can work to serve everybody, not just promoting minorities. Although, as a woman, I can't believe that we're a minority, even though we constitute the 50% of the population, but how we can really take a balanced, mature approach towards diversity and inclusion that really includes everyone, and learn the lessons, because I think DEI, the backlash to it, has been really shocking, but predictable.
I think you're totally right. It has gone a bit into that direction where people felt like, okay, this is not an inclusion, this is not an equality, equity program anymore, but that's favoring the underrepresented groups. And it should really be an inclusion, a diversity, and everyone has the same chances. Everyone is the same. We're all human beings, and we might not look the same and we might not think the same, but we should all be treated equally. And I think that's the main reason for diversity and inclusion, that we all see people with the same lens.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that when you look at it in the context of recent history, back in the 70s, I mean, I know there's a lot of clips that people my age watch, and we kind of have a laugh really about how shocking, when you look at television we were brought up with in the 70s, is through a modern lens. It was completely sexist, racist, homophobic. And you look at it and you look through, there were programs like Yes Sir. I think it was of course called something like Yes Sir, where it was about a language school, and it's completely just taking the mickey out of all these different stereotypes of different people from different cultures. The homophobia, there's a program that I showed friends of mine recently in India called It Ain't Half Hot Mum, where it's about the English in Burma, and it's so racist and homophobic, everything. So when you look at that being normal in the 70s, I think the problem for DEI has been this feeling that actually being abusive towards people because of their sexuality or their gender or etc. is not acceptable anymore. But then what it did was it started to be seen as being too prescriptive, and so people felt that they couldn't say anything, that they're gagged, they can't express themselves in case they offend someone. So then this whole idea of people being lightweights and being snowflakes because they get so upset and they're so offended. And so it's really ironic seeing that after the amazing Bad Bunny halftime show, all the right-wing commentators were saying, oh, but it was in Spanish and they were saying offensive things in Spanish and we need to cancel it. And so they're then turning around and saying the same things that they accuse the other side of saying. So I think what you have is this whole idea of people being not able to say things that are rude and offensive anymore. That's how DEI then ended up becoming seen as. And I know, because it's a subject that I'm really interested in, that when I had conversations with my brother, who works at an electricity company, and with friends of mine in a pub, when they're not being talked to, they're not being asked questions by people in their own organisation or by HR, and they've had a few drinks. You ask them, I would ask them what they thought of DEI, and I'd get some very colourful responses. They said that my brother, who works at National Grid, actually, he said, I won't say his name, he said the idea of having an electricity pylon and having to make it wheelchair friendly, accessible, and it's political correctness gone mad. That's the expression you hear most of all. And people tiptoe around it. They can actually get, there's disciplinary action as well. It's gone from all this prejudice is totally acceptable to none of it's acceptable, and then to a situation where, hey, now that let's go and get some balance in this subject, because we've seen the backlash to it has been horrific. absolutely horrific. We've seen 5-year-old children in Spider-Man backpacks being arrested and sent to detention camps. We've seen this backlash against DEI has enabled in America this backlash, which has been grotesque and cruel and shocking. And so I think we all need, when this nightmare is over and some sanity has resumed to US politics, it's going to take them a long time to recover from this in terms of the reputation of the US around the world. But this Band-Aid was ripped off, and what was exposed underneath has been so ugly, with the likes of Stephen Miller and this kind of horrendous view of the world as an ugly place in which it's all about strong men and domination and constant war. And it's just such a nasty, horrible picture. And it's fascinating when you are part of the DEI world to see that the world seems to be divided currently between this world of inverted commas strong men like Putin and Trump, where homophobia is not only acceptable, but it's legalized, that it's acceptable to domestic violence against women is acceptable, that that gay people should be locked up and criminalized, and all of this kind of world on one side. And then on the other side you have these Europeans going there and kind of not really knowing how to react against this very ugly backlash. And so it's time really for us in parts of the world, and to support colleagues in other parts of the world, like in the Soviet Union, in America, who want to just fight against this very ugly right-wing attack on democracy, on human rights, on diversity and inclusion, and everything, which is aiming to take us back to a very nasty era in the past. And it's fundamentally untrue. So, for instance, the rationale behind a lot of these so-called right-wing, these right-wing talking points, that immigrants are criminals, and to quote Donald Trump, which is not something that I would ever imagine myself saying, but I'm going to quote Donald Trump, to say that all Mexicans are rapists and murderers and all this stupid nonsense he's saying. This is a talking point that is repeated. And so what's happened, though, is you look at studies that have happened, for instance, in Denmark, which is a very, very pro-democracy, pro-human rights country. In Denmark, they've done the studies of immigrants who've come, for instance, after the war in Syria, and they've settled in Denmark. And they've done the studies and shown that actually you'll have a high proportion of young men that happen to be a certain demographic and so on. So when you actually take out all the inconsistencies, so for instance, in Danish society as a whole, you have a percentage of pensioners, a percentage of children and so on. So with immigrants, when they come, they tend to be male, they tend to be a certain demographic. So when you remove all of that and actually just look at the cold, hard statistics, you'll find that statistically there are the same amount of rapists and murderers, etc., amongst immigrants as Danes. That's it. It's all nonsense. It's all just lies that are deliberately designed to invoke fear and an emotional response, which will then support their aims, which is just to get into power and to subjugate all of us with their nasty, negative, horrible view of the world. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, you can create fear to control people. You divide them, you control them, just make sure they're afraid of something. Yeah, it's very sad, but it's true. And I think, what you mentioned before, I just thought about like tiptoeing around the whole diversity and inclusion and wokeness. It's not really the same in English or German. For example, a doctor in English, it's a woman and a man, but in German, you have a female and a male version, for example, and you have to always include both of them in a text that you write. So, and that is with star or with the female ending, and there's such a huge discussion about this, how to solve it. So it's very delicate. And I think we have to soften that and really go back to where is the real problem. The real problem is that we do have racism. We do have people who look at other people and feel like they're different, so we don't want to include them. But it's not the writing issue. It's really making sure that wherever it is possible, that you are inclusive and just be open.
And especially when you look at what's happening in America, Trump has just rewritten the rules of political discourse. He just says things that are completely false. So when you add this as fuel to the fire, he's talking about how children are being having sex change operations at school without their parents' knowledge or permission. Complete nonsense, or just madness. And then that people are immigrants specifically eating people's pets in Ohio, dogs and cats. And so he's coming out with these cruel, crazy nonsense lies. So there, when you look at it, this is actually an extension of a backlash to pronouns. You can link it back to that. There was a Republican conference in the US a few years ago, and they had a big slogan there, and it said, "Awake but not woke." And so actually, when you look at these terrible things like immigrants, this claim that immigrants are eating people's pets, that schools are forcibly doing sex change operations on children, all lies, but you can see it all coming back to D&I because of people being right-wing people being so offended by the idea that people can choose their pronouns that actually you end up in this crazy situation now where, again, these lies are being perpetrated in order to elicit an emotional reaction. Parents are terrified that their children are going to be given sex change operations. They're terrified that they can't let the cat out at night because immigrants are going to come and eat the family pets. It's all lies. And you can link it all back to DEI. So offended they are by the idea that someone should write their pronouns that actually you end up with a awake but not woke. And woke, the whole meaning of woke is aware of actually taking an honest look at history. I mean, I'm fascinated by the story of African American survival and fight and progression. And so now the Trump administration is trying to rewrite that history. And they talk about skills that people learned as slaves and that it wasn't all bad. I mean, what kind of madness is that? And that's actually what's happening. And there's also a drive to eliminating, criminalizing books, the banned books. So I think 1984 and the Diary of Anne Frank have been banned. Now that really is crazy. This attempt to roll back the world to not just the pre-1950s world, but the late 1880s. Life doesn't work like that. You can't roll back the clock. So the Trump's administration attempt to defy the laws of logic and physics by turning the clock back will ultimately end up in failure. I mean, you're looking at somebody who's managed to bankrupt casinos. So I really am looking forward to a time which will come soon where rationality will be resumed, morality will be resumed, and we can move forward in a new, refreshed, relevant, exciting, truly inclusive diversity and inclusion agenda where we can permanently put our stamp in agenda where we can put all of these terrible backlash to DEI in the bin and consign it to the rubbish bin of history, but learn the lessons from it because it's been truly horrific. And who would have thought that DEI could have elicited such an absolutely unbelievably dangerous and destructive reaction? DEI, some people say it's not important. Well, it really is.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Your words were really inspiring because we see we're going back in time. It's like, why didn't we learn something?
Yeah.
Lisa, I also don't want to miss to go back to your business, Together Global, and share how can companies or individuals engage with you.
Thank you, Andrea. So to get in touch with us, just send us an email to myself, Lisa at togetherglobal.com. Go to our website, togetherglobal.com, and let's have a conversation. We run friction audits, so you can get a real picture of what friction is like in your organization. And if you want to jump straight in, you can trial the program with Teams in Flow with a new team or an active team and run a pilot with a test and control team and see the measurable results for yourself.
Perfect. So before we close, I want to give you the opportunity to share your final thought.
I'd like to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And for those of us interested in diversity and inclusion in the corporate sphere, I believe that's going to be reflected in a return of DEI to its rightful place, guiding and supporting businesses to reflect the societies in which they operate and really bring to life the reality that organizations, it's not just about making money, it's about all living together productively and happily. And so for those of us who are worried about current times, I very strongly believe we'll look back on it and see it as this bizarre blip in history, and ultimately DEI will be back and stronger and better than ever.
I love your last words. I love talking to you. It was so uplifting as well. I agree that we're gonna face other times again. It's just it's hard to get through these times, and but we keep on going and keep fighting. So thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you.
Now, if you want to make your supply chain more inclusive, reach out via fipsconsulting.com or Fips Consulting on LinkedIn. Listen in to my next episodes where I talk to more experts about supplier diversity and inclusion and the impact it has on their company. If you have any inputs or topics around DEI, supplier diversity and inclusion you want me to talk about, let me know. Thanks much for listening, and bye responsible.